Judge Edward Chen entered the federal courthouse in downtown Miami with an air of authority, his black robes billowing like storm clouds as he prepared to preside over a high-profile corruption case. The humid Tuesday morning buzzed with anticipation, the packed gallery filled with journalists balancing laptops on their knees and notepads at the ready. The case had drawn national attention, not only for its significance but because Florida's former Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was facing off against Chen, a judge notorious for his ruthless demeanor. At precisely 9 a.m., Chen swept into the courtroom, his rigid posture and wire-rimmed glasses perched on a hawkish nose signaling his belief in his own untouchability. "All rise," the bailiff called, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room as the proceedings began. Pam Bondi, immaculate in a tailored navy suit, approached the podium, but before she could speak, Chen's voice cut through the air like a scythe. "Ms. Bondi, I see you're representing the defense today. I must say, I'm surprised you've taken on such a complex case, given your record." His emphasis turned the words into an insult. Bondi's expression remained neutral, her blonde hair framing a face that betrayed no emotion. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Yes, I am lead counsel for the defense," she replied calmly. Chen, shuffling papers on his bench without looking up, continued, "Let's hope you've prepared more thoroughly than in your last appearance in my courtroom. We wouldn't want another embarrassing performance." A ripple of tension spread through the gallery. Everyone knew of their previous clash, where Chen had repeatedly interrupted Bondi's arguments and denied nearly every motion she filed. What they didn't know was that Bondi had spent the past 6 months meticulously preparing for this moment. "I assure you, Your Honor, I am fully prepared," she responded, her slight southern accent a subtle tell to those who knew her well that she was keeping her temper in check. For the next 40 minutes, Chen maintained his hostile demeanor, questioning Bondi's every statement with thinly veiled contempt. He allowed the prosecution considerable latitude while restricting her responses, interrupting or dismissing her points whenever she gained momentum. Seasoned court reporters exchanged glances. Chen's behavior crossed the line from stern to unprofessional. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably, noticing the disparity in treatment. Yet Bondi remained composed, responding to each barb with respectful but firm replies. Those closest to her saw her jotting deliberate, measured notes on a yellow legal pad, not the frantic scribbles of someone overwhelmed, but documentation of a plan unfolding. As the morning session neared its conclusion, Chen looked down at Bondi over his glasses. "We'll recess for lunch, Ms. Bondi. I suggest you use the time to reconsider your strategy. At this rate, your client might want to explore a plea deal." Several prosecutors smirked openly, but Bondi gathered her materials with unhurried precision. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear throughout the courtroom. "I look forward to continuing after the recess." As Chen rose to leave, he didn't notice Bondi's co-counsel slide a thick manila folder onto their table, stamped with federal markings, nor the stern-faced woman with Department of Justice credentials who had slipped into the back row during the proceedings. When court reconvened, the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken tension. Chen returned to the bench with his imperial bearing, his disdain now almost theatrical. "Ms. Bondi," he began without preamble, "I've reviewed some of your filings during the break. I must say, I'm struggling to follow your legal reasoning. Perhaps you could enlighten us with your unique interpretation of precedent." A few prosecutors chuckled, one whispering to a colleague who stifled a laugh. Bondi stood, smoothing her jacket. "I'd be happy to elaborate, Your Honor. The precedent established in Harrison v. Miller clearly supports our position." Chen interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Really, Ms. Bondi? That case was effectively gutted by the 11th Circuit last year. I would have expected a former state attorney general to keep up with current jurisprudence." His assessment was incorrect. He was confusing Harrison versus Miller with Harris versus Millbrook, an entirely different case. The mistake was glaring to any competent attorney, but before Bondi could clarify, Chen continued his public dressing down. "Perhaps in Florida, the standards for legal argument are more flexible," he sneered, prompting more laughter. "But in my courtroom, I expect counsel to come armed with more than charm and political connections." Reporters typed furiously, capturing the judge's inappropriate commentary. Jurors' expressions ranged from uncomfortable to disapproving. "Your Honor," Bondi replied evenly, "if I may direct the court's attention to the supplementary brief we filed, page 17 outlines the distinction between Harrison versus Miller and the case you may be referring to." Chen waved dismissively. Ms. Bondi, I've been on the bench for 22 years. I don't need a refresher on case law from someone whose legal career has been more about press conferences than precedent. The mockery crossed a blatant line, making even some prosecutors uncomfortable. The Department of Justice observer in the back row took notes with focused intensity. Bondi, maintaining her calm demeanor, documented each inappropriate comment and procedural overreach. Her legal pad now held a detailed chronology of judicial misconduct that could raise serious questions in any appellate court. After a particularly cutting remark, she said, "Your Honor, may I request that my objection to the court's characterization be noted in the record?" Chen smirked. "Note whatever you wish, Ms. Bondi. It won't change the weakness of your case." He played to the audience, adding, "In my experience, when attorneys start objecting to the court's tone, it usually means they've run out of substantive arguments." A shifting current of sympathy toward Bondi and discomfort with Chen's behavior began to emerge. During a brief sidebar, Chen leaned close to Bondi, his voice low but audible. "You're out of your depth here, counselor. Always have been. Your reputation won't save you in my courtroom." As they returned to their positions, Bondi's co-counsel slid another document across the table. She glanced at it briefly, tucking it into her folio with a slight nod, a gesture unnoticed by Chen, who was too absorbed in his performance. The court reporter's fingers flew, capturing not just the words but the tone of a judge crossing from strict to abusive. A court sketch artist immortalized the scene, Chen's face twisted in smug derision, looming over Bondi, whose composed expression revealed nothing of the counterattack she was about to launch. 3 hours into the afternoon session, Chen's mockery had become routine, undermining Bondi's defense with predictable interruptions. A palpable weariness settled over the courtroom until Bondi rose to present her opening arguments. "Your Honor, before I continue, I'd like to address several procedural matters that have emerged today," she began, her voice clear and strong. Chen sighed theatrically. "Ms. Bondi, we've already wasted enough time on procedural complaints unless there's something substantive." "There is, Your Honor," she interrupted, a small act of defiance that sent a ripple of surprise through the room. "I'd like to direct the court's attention to Judicial Canon 2A, which states that a judge shall respect and comply with the law and act in a manner that promotes public confidence in the integrity and impartiality of the judiciary." Chen's expression darkened. "Are you suggesting this court has failed to uphold judicial standards, counselor?" Bondi responded, "I am not merely suggesting it, Your Honor. I am formally entering into the record documented evidence of judicial misconduct." The prosecution team exchanged alarmed glances. Bondi called Special Agent Marcus Rivera of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit to the stand. Rivera revealed that for the past 11 months, the FBI had been investigating judicial corruption in the district, including warranted surveillance of communications between Chen and individuals with financial interests in his cases. Bondi presented a thick binder, entering into evidence transcripts of recorded conversations between Chen and Maxwell Harrington, CEO of Gulfstream Industries, the primary beneficiary if the defendant were convicted. "These conversations discuss ensuring the right outcome in this trial," she stated, distributing copies to the clerk, prosecution, and Chen himself. His face turned ashen as he stared at the transcripts. "Additionally," Bondi continued, "we have evidence of substantial deposits to an offshore account linked to Your Honor, each occurring within 48 hours of significant rulings favorable to Gulfstream Industries." The lead prosecutor, James Moretti, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, the government had no knowledge of these allegations. We request an immediate sidebar." Chen, momentarily paralyzed, watched as bank statements, wire transfers, and shell company documentation formed a paper trail leading to his chambers. The Department of Justice observer, now joined by 3 more agents, watched with calculated intensity. Bondi pressed on, presenting evidence that Chen had suppressed exculpatory evidence in 3 previous cases, resulting in wrongful convictions that benefited Gulfstream. Email exchanges, obtained through federal warrants, appeared on the courtroom's display system, clearly showing judicial misconduct. These communications were part of an ongoing corruption investigation, Bondi explained, addressing the reporters and jurors, who stared at Chen with disbelief. One juror shook her head in disgust. Chen's voice, stripped of authority, stammered, "This is outrageous. These allegations are completely documented, verified, and corroborated by multiple sources," Bondi finished. She nodded to Agent Rivera, who produced a sealed envelope containing a Department of Justice request for an emergency suspension of the proceedings pending a full investigation into judicial misconduct. As Chen fumbled with the envelope, his hands trembled. The courtroom held its breath as he scanned the document, his face flushing crimson. "This is procedurally irregular," he stammered. These allegations should have been filed through proper channels, not sprung in open court as a publicity stunt. Bondi responded, Your Honor, we attempted to address these concerns through proper channels 3 times over the past 4 months. Each filing mysteriously disappeared from the record. After the 3rd attempt, we had no choice but to present our evidence in open court where it could be properly documented. She gestured to the court reporter, whose relentless typing captured every word. Moretti requested a recess to confer with the Department of Justice representatives, now numbering 5, their presence an unspoken threat. After a 30-minute recess stretched to 45, the bailiff emerged from Chen's chambers, conferring with the Department of Justice team instead of calling the court to order. A woman in a tailored charcoal suit, Deputy Director Lauren Vasquez of the Public Integrity Section, entered with 2 U.S. Marshals. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, Judge Edward Chen is currently being detained pending formal charges of judicial corruption, obstruction of justice, bribery, and racketeering under the RICO Act. The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations. Vasquez continued, by order of the Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit, these proceedings are suspended. The defendant's case will be reassigned, and a full review of all cases presided over by Judge Chen in the past 5 years will be conducted. The jurors were dismissed, many casting glances of respect toward Bondi. Vasquez approached Bondi, who confirmed her team had documentation on 17 cases showing judicial misconduct and would cooperate fully with the investigation. Moretti, visibly shaken, assured Vasquez the prosecution had no knowledge of Chen's activities and would conduct an internal review. As a commotion drew attention to the judge's chambers, 2 U.S. Marshals emerged with Chen between them, his hands in handcuffs. The once imperious judge looked diminished, his eyes vacant with shock. As they met Bondi's, he realized her patient, methodical work had orchestrated his downfall. Bondi's face remained professional, betraying no emotion, though her squared shoulders signaled vindication. Outside, the courthouse steps became a media circus. News vans lined the street, reporters jostling for position as cameras captured Chen being led to a black SUV, his handcuffs gleaming in the Florida sunlight. His tie was askew, his forehead glistened with sweat, and he offered no response to the barrage of questions. Judge Chen, do you have any response to the corruption charges? Were you working alone? Did you target Pam Bondi specifically? The man who had begun the day humiliating Bondi now couldn't face the public scrutiny he had brought upon himself. Bondi, standing apart from the chaos, listened intently to a phone call, her expression revealing nothing but a slight softening around her eyes, satisfaction at a long-planned strategy unfolding precisely as intended. As she signed a document acknowledging the case's suspension, camera flashes captured a moment that would dominate legal discussions for months. A victory not just in court but in exposing corruption that had poisoned the justice system she had sworn to uphold.